So the first thing we're going to talk about is credit decisioning. So we had a debate internally. So we had this diagram on the right side that I've used in a lot of different scenarios, and it's always entitled The Art of a Decision. And we had this conversation about credit decisioning specifically. Do we consider this truly an art? And we came up with that obviously there are certain aspects that can make every organization unique in how they go about their credit decisioning process, the tools that they use, so on and so forth. But it's not really an art. Credit decisioning is a certainty. It's something that we have to do well, and there is a specific framework that can enable us to get there. And what is that framework? Very simply, it's how do we get data? How do we bring in the data that's out there? So a lot of the times what we're seeing now is there's exabytes of data, and everybody is in the field of, I need all the data possible to utilize that data. And that's not necessarily the case. It's not about getting all of the data. It's getting the right data that we need to make a decision off of. And that's really this concept of data on demand. So there's internal data that we have. If they're an existing client, obviously we have a ton of data, first-party data that we have. If they're new to bank, we have limited first-party data, but there's all this third-party data. How do we bring that third-party data in as part of the process, automate that process of bringing that data in that allows us to then derive deeper insights off of it, utilizing machine learning and AI to really understand our data in new ways. And when we have that understanding of our data, we can then act accordingly in ways that matter to our clients. And this is never more important than it is in the credit decisioning space. So I have one client in particular who is looking at increasing their exposure rates. And they came to us, and this was a couple years ago, and they said, look, we're embarking on this journey to increase our exposures. We don't want to move the needle from a risk perspective. We have just been using traditional data, calling the credit bureau, getting that in, using a basic scorecard, and then determining yes, no, so on and so forth. And they said, we want to be able to start understanding our clients in new ways. We want to build an ecosystem of alternative data where we can bring in data from a variety of sources, build our own analytics that then empower better decisions. So they went out to create this ecosystem. So they're now utilizing over 120 different data sources. They're bringing in a variety of different alternative data sources, things like utility bills, all of this data that lets them get a holistic picture of their client, whether they're an existing customer or new to bank. But it revolutionized their understanding of who was applying for credit. And they use these proprietary data sets to then empower better analytics. They started building machine learning models, proprietary scorecards in the platform that they could operationalize in real time that allowed them to then understand this data, derive deeper insights off of that data that then allowed them to make more informed decisions. And with this cycle, they were able to increase their exposures by 15%. They didn't move the needle from a risk perspective. The outcomes were fantastic. But that's the power. That's the certainty of a decision. When we go along with the framework that we have, the outcomes are there to be had. So bringing in third-party data, leveraging AI, but all of this is really driving towards an automated process where you're getting all of this in an automated fashion. You're reducing the dependency to go out, inject manual intervention or inject the need to go out and interact with your client. How can we streamline this as much as possible because the outcomes are just stacked on top of each other when we can start to automate this process from start to finish? Does that make sense to everyone? So if we take it a step further, so what superpowers do you need for digital onboarding specifically? So in today's world, the stats are, it's over 90% I've seen out there. I've seen 82%. But the amount of applications that are coming in from digital channels obviously is skyrocketing. So that also breeds the question of, in the digital world, how do we drive personalization? I did a session yesterday on that personalized approach because it's not like you're going into a bank, you're having that face-to-face conversation. All of this is happening through digital channels. So how do you have that emotional connection? Goes back to what I just said. It's understanding your clients in new ways. It's bringing in the data that allows you to do that. Some of the areas that we're going to focus on here. So we talked about credit decisioning. I mentioned application fraud is top of mind. These are conversations that I'm having on a daily basis with clients across the globe is application fraud. We're going to talk about dynamic pricing, conversion rates, and then how do we actually execute all of this? So it's all good in theory, but what is the actual strategy execution and how do we go about doing that to achieve success? So what we've seen in the market, there's a ton of stuff coming out. So as I mentioned, what we're seeing, 41% of fraud last year was application fraud, P2P fraud. And we're seeing first-party fraud really increasing due to the rise in certain things, synthetic fraud, but we're also seeing things like income misrepresentation as being top of mind. So this is a huge issue that a lot of my clients are struggling right now, is how do we get the controls in place to really thread the needle of ensuring that our strategies align to our risk tolerance. And it's an easy concept, it's hard to put into practice. So the goal from a FICO perspective is how do we do this? It's threading the needle of moving at hyperspeed. So when we talk about automation, we talk about credit decisioning, everything is hyperspeed forward. But how do we do that in a way that we're being cognizant of all the fraudsters that are out there sitting on the sidelines that are learning from what we're doing? I was talking to one of my clients here earlier today, actually, about some of the things that they were seeing. And they said, our number one problem right now is that we are having deceased people apply for credit every day. And over 80% of them are getting approved. And he was like, I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure that these people should not be getting approved. And he goes, we just don't, and I asked him, I said, so like, why? Like, what are you missing? And he goes, Jaron, it's hard. Like, we can't get the data in at the right time, so everything is reactive. And he goes, this is what we need FICO's help with. We need to figure out how we can be proactive, to know, to match what we're seeing, the information that we have in the platform in real time to make that decision upfront in a proactive way, not a reactive way. So that's all about having the fraud controls in place, but another aspect of that is when we put in certain, not restrictions, but we put in certain controls, there's also this concern of, as we do that, it's going to apply more friction in the process. And we all know what happens when we apply friction. Abandonment rates go through the roof. I've read something recently that said if an application takes more than 5 minutes, the abandonment rate goes up like 60%. So people demand that speed, that quickness, that ease of use, no intervention, just apply and go. But what we've also seen is that there are reports over there that ask people, if we were to tell you why we're applying friction, why we're asking for more information, what impact would that have? We told you, hey, we're doing this from a fraud perspective to protect you. Would that change your thought process on the friction? And it was about 67% of clients said, if I knew that friction was designed to protect me in a meaningful way, I would be okay with that happening. So that's one of our opportunities that I'm going to talk about in another slide as well, is it's not just applying friction to apply friction's sake. It's applying the right friction in a way that doesn't disrupt that straight through process. It's allowing our customers to know and understand why that friction is being placed in the process to protect them in meaningful ways. So going back to the verifying everything through cross-checking, being able to have those controls in place, to have the data that allows you to cross-check, having the rules and strategies in place, that goes back to the conversation I was having this morning of how do we cross-check the information that we have from an application perspective with all of the data that's out there to understand, hey, this person died 6 years ago, they probably don't need a credit card. So it's all about cross-checking in the right way, utilizing application fraud scores. So that's a big topic for FICO right now, is scoring from an application fraud perspective. So we have a lot of tools. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I'll get a little over my skis on that one. But if you go to the Innovation Center and talk to some of our fraud experts, they would be happy to talk about our application fraud scoring abilities and how that translates into the platform and some of the successes that our clients have seen from that. And then lastly, it's all about reacting faster. It's staying a step ahead. So the fraudsters are out there, they're working, but how do we have a platform that is giving us constant feedback where we're understanding what's happening and allowing us to move in real time, make changes on the fly, and we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. But it's all about future-proofing yourself, future-proofing your business, protecting yourself, and there's so much more that we can go into. Like I said, if there's specific questions on that, all of our fraud experts are upstairs. They would love to have that conversation and dive deeper to what we're seeing in the market and specifically how we're helping our clients in this space. So from a dynamic pricing perspective, this is one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about, especially in the onboarding process. So if you were at main stage this morning, you heard Mazen and Seth, they were talking about optimization and how that is one of the biggest differentiators, not just for FICO, but for our clients as well. And we talk about it in the pricing world. The clients that I have that have embraced dynamic pricing, pricing optimization, that they've optimized this part of their process, the success they've seen is astronomical. So I talked to somebody, this is probably 9 months ago, and we were talking about pricing, and I said, how does your organization view pricing? And they say, if we have the lowest price, we're gonna win. They said it's a race to the bottom, and I said, that's not the best strategy from my perspective. If it's working for you, that's great, and they said, oh no, it's not working. But that's how we view it right now, because we don't have another way. And that is what I mean. It's not this notion of a race to the bottom, if I'm the cheapest, I'm gonna win. It's the race to the sweet spot. It's how do we use data and analytics, predictive analytics, optimization to understand, to really create this customer-centric understanding that allows us to not just throw out the lowest price, but throw out the right price. How do we know our client? The propensity goes up if we present the right price, not the lowest price. And this all goes into personalization as well. So if we're driving personalization at scale across the enterprise, what we see is that if you have a personalized experience where they think my bank knows me for who I am, they understand me as a client, what that trust can deliver is they're not necessarily going to go for the lowest price. They're going to go for the right price. And that's what we're doing. So when we look at it from a pricing perspective, it's all about embracing this customer-centric loan price optimization world. But there's 3 main areas that we see as a focal point for dynamic pricing. The first is, how do we simplify this? This is a highly complex scenario or situation or process. Pricing gets very messy. A lot of the companies that I work with still have their pricing tables in Excel. We've seen it, it's super convoluted. I get a headache just trying to understand what they're doing. But there's options out there. There's ways to circumvent that. And that's one of the focuses for FICO is how do we simplify this process using optimization, using predictive analytics that allow you to really get towards that customer-centric view of your client to understand what is the right price for them, how to understand what is the propensity to accept depending on different thresholds. And that's where optimization really makes a huge difference for our clients. The second piece is making analytics transparent, understandable, easy to use for business experts. So when we talk about optimization, what it's always been has been a tool for data scientists where we would as a business, we'd throw our requirements over to the IT team and the data science team. They would ingest that, they would do it, they would send something back in a black box. We wouldn't know how they came up with it, why they came up with it, what constraints they used. What we want to do is to make this piece of it transparent, where everybody from a business perspective, from a technology perspective, understands what is going into this, what are the constraints that are going into this, how are we coming up with the analytics and the predictive analytics that we're using in the process. And that goes into the third point of enabling stakeholders to collaboratively drive optimization together. So what we've seen is that as we drive collaboration in this process where we have our data science team, our business team, our analysts, everybody has a say in the matter where they can all put in the constraints that matter to them. They all have this unified canvas where they can all put in the things that matter to them. It drives everyone towards a common goal where everyone is collaborating to achieve the same success. And what we've seen is that when we start to embrace these 3 methodologies or these 3 aspects of the pricing process, it's a massive, massive differentiator for our clients. The ones that do this well are able to really, really drive an increase in exposure at rates that others aren't. Their propensity levels go up massively. So pricing is a huge opportunity for a lot of the clients that I have. There's been some optimization sessions, so I hope some of you were able to get into some of those and see. If not, again, upstairs, we have in the Innovation Center our optimization team who would love to walk through what we do in a little more depth from an optimization perspective, not just in pricing, but across the gamut of the life cycle as well. Another area that I talk about, so the same client that I was talking to earlier today that was dealing with the deceased applicant problem, they're also seeing massive, massive dropout rates during the process as well. So he made a joke, he goes, so we know like if they actually apply, they're probably deceased, so we should just cut them out because everyone else is abandoning the process. And this is a major global bank.
So what they're looking at is, like I mentioned, if we're starting to get into over 5 minutes of the process, if we're asking for additional data and they don't know why, the abandonment rates go through the roof. So what they were coming to us saying, they go, we want to be able to optimize this process where when customers are dropping out, we can see where in the process they're dropping out. So one, how do we automate that and streamline that process to ensure that we have the right data so that we're not losing them at this point? But two, the customers that do drop out, what can we do to go out and re-engage these clients? How can we get them back? And it was a really interesting conversation. But two of the things that we talked about with them this morning, so one was obviously friction levels. How do you apply the right amount of friction, but making it more in a conversational way? And that's one of the dreams that they have for their retail bank onboarding process, is how do we utilize the technologies out there to make it more of an interactive, conversational type application? I've seen that. I did this with Daryl, this session a couple months ago, Daryl Knopp, who's on our product marketing team, and he was saying, I applied for pet insurance recently, and he goes, it was the best process I've ever gone through because I was just chatting with what I thought was a person. I found out later was not even a real person. But he goes, I was having this two-way interaction where they were asking me questions, I was answering in the app, and then, he goes, 5 minutes later, I was approved. And he goes, I didn't even realize that I was giving information because the experience was just out of this world. And that's the type of personalization that we're driving. And this client that I was speaking to earlier, that's what they were imagining for their retail bank onboarding perspective that they wanted to take across the gamut of the enterprise, was how do I make the onboarding process interactive, where it's really driving that personalized approach. It's driving that kind of emotional tug with your client, where it's like, hey, they understand I don't feel like I'm being asked things out of the realm because it's this process, it's this feeling, it's this different type of experience. And at the end of the day, what we're talking about with personalization is optimizing customer experiences. And that's a big opportunity for us. It establishes trust, it establishes security, but it also drives transparency through the process because you are asking in ways that matter, where they don't feel like it's out of the blue to be asked for these questions. And then the last thing was, they identified where customers are abandoning, so they want to streamline that with bringing in additional data so that they can automate that piece of their process. But then they want to go out and they want to be able to actually re-engage those customers utilizing some of our communication tools where, hey, if we've seen this customer drop out, we've had their permission up front to contact them, how can we then re-engage with them in ways that matter, that will drive more re-engagement in the process as well. So there's a ton of things to be done in the abandonment process and really optimizing that experience. But for me, it all comes back to personalization. I know I'm just saying that word a lot here, so bear with me. But at the end of the day, that's what moves the needle for my clients, is that personalized approach that drives trust at scale across the gamut of different lines of business. It's really a game changer. But how do we achieve this? We achieve this through a single platform. I'm a little biased, but we can achieve this through FICO platform, just a shameless little plug out here. So at the end of the day, all of this comes down to actual execution. So we have the decisioning, we have all of the data, we have the analytics. How do we actually execute on this? How do we embrace a composable architecture that allows us to empower the business users, those who actually have the strategies in their minds? How do we empower them to then own the technology with guardrails where they can go in and they can make changes on the fly, they can adapt in real time? That all comes down to this composable architecture deployment. And that's what FICO Platform is built off of, this concept of composability. Obviously, how do we make rule decisions in real time? How do we automate the process? How do we bring in data in automated fashion that drives real-time decisioning? How do we build this intelligence layer for speed, agility, resilience? We talk a lot about applied intelligence, marrying together your human and your machine elements to drive better decisions at scale. And that's what the platform offers. So a lot of people ask me, where does the platform fit? When we're talking about credit decisioning, are we talking about an LOS up front? Where does this fit? And I always say the answer is a little complicated. So I have customers that utilize FICO Platform as a true LOS system where we have the front-end UI. We then connect to all these data sources. We do all the decisioning. But I also have a lot of clients that truly use us as that applied intelligence layer or that single source of truth layer where we are sitting between front-end systems, back-end systems to be that layer of data analytics, decisioning in between your two. So it really varies, but if you ask me, like, where does FICO platform fit in the organization? Like, what my answer would be? I always consider it the layer of abstraction. We sit in between your front end and your back end systems. A lot of my clients are always revolutionizing or modernizing their front end. They're investing in new LOS systems. They're investing in modernizing their mobile apps and other front ends. They're maybe modernizing their core, their system of records, but there's always something missing that inhibits their ability to really execute at scale in real time in an efficient way. And that is this layer of glue, this applied intelligence layer that connect into all of your front-end systems, all of your back-end systems, that allows you to get the right data at the right time, share, collaborate, reuse at scale, and that's what FICO Platform delivers for our clients. So we have clients that utilize us as a true LOS. We have clients that utilize us just for the analytics and decisioning layer. So it's kind of a loaded question. I don't know why I asked myself that to give such a complicated answer. But all of that, regardless if you're using it as a front end or as this applied intelligence layer, it drives personalization in new ways. It gives you a canvas to collaborate with different business groups. It gives you the ability to reuse what you're doing in one area of the business with another area of the business. So we had one of our clients who was on stage this morning. They came to us and they said, look, we have all these different lines of businesses that are all acting independently. He goes, you guys talk a lot about breaking down silos amongst business groups from like a technology standpoint. He goes, but the reality is we need to break down the systems with the silos within a single use case. He goes, what we're doing in HELOC and versus card versus auto, like all of these groups are working so independently, but there's so much that can be achieved by having like a single source of truth that allows us to span across all these different lines of business. So they utilize FICO Platform. We have the orchestration that pulls into all of their front-end systems, but how they went about designing it was they had a single layer for all of their global strategies and rules. So they had all of their knockout rules, all of their KYC and SIP rules in one single layer that spanned across all lines of business. So if I came in and I'm 17 years old and I apply for a credit card and I get denied here, why does that not then translate into an auto loan or even a deposit account or a HELOC? Like why are we rerunning the same checks at every step? Why don't we have this globalized standard layer where Jaron comes in, he applies, he's 17, he's knocked out for everything? And that allowed them to move quicker. It allowed them to reduce the amount of data that they were bringing in, especially from third-party vendors. It improved their fraud rates. It improved their exposure rates. So they have this single layer of truth for all of those different areas that span across all of their lines of business. Once somebody gets through that, they then go down into line of business specific logic. So if they come in, it goes in through this global, then down through either HELOC or card or so on and so forth. But it allowed them to start automating this process. It gave them that single source of truth that really started to transform and change the way that they were doing business, that they were underwriting, that they were onboarding clients. So just an amazing experience they've had. And they also said they talked about personalization on stage this morning. And what they said was like it really started to build trust throughout our clients. And we've taken what we're doing upstream into new areas downstream as well. So the information and the data that they have, the analytics that they have up front, they're now utilizing into account management and customer management. They're moving into collections as well. But what they said is we're building this ecosystem, this single platform approach where what the experience that our customers have when they come to the bank up front, it's the same experience they're having downstream in other areas. And that drives that notion of trust where my bank knows me for who I am. It's the same experience. It's not something different. Like when we're sending out information or other pieces, it's coming from a similar source, a similar channel. The tonality is the same. So it really drives that notion of, hey, this is coming from my bank and my bank knows me. And that's driving loyalty at scale. And when we drive loyalty, when we drive user engagement, there's direct correlations on revenue, on NPS scores, on stock price. So massive, massive improvements by really embracing this single source of truth throughout the organization. So what does that look like? So I'm sure you have all seen this slide quite a bit this week. This is how it translates from a FICO perspective. A single set, composable capabilities, drive modularity, drive agility, but allow you to bring in all of your data wherever it is, whether that be internal or external. I always think of it as the tentacles of an octopus. We build a framework that allows us to get the right data at the right time. We also allow you full operationalized data transparency to understand what data is being used, why it's being used, how it's being used, but full visibility into that, whether that be streaming data, batch data, real time. But once we have the data, we allow you to derive deeper insights off of that data. So things like profiling, things like injecting your analytics and embedding your analytics directly into your strategies, all of these different insight capabilities that allow you to understand your data in new ways. These insights lead to better actions. And when I say actions and better actions, it's relevant actions. It's reacting in ways that matter to your client, driving that personalized approach, driving actions that are proactive instead of reactive in nature. And what we see is that as you start to embrace actions, it's driving better business outcomes in ways that matter to your business. It transforms the way that our clients are doing business, which in turn transforms the way that their clients are doing business with them.